A little bit about myself, I guess. We'll start with that. I was born in Wyoming, grew up in Oklahoma, youngest of 5 kids. My mother and my father were divorced early on. I have no memory of them living as husband and wife. My dad got custody of 5 kids, and I was the youngest. So by the time I came around, it was like, just stay out of the streets, you're good to go. All right, and that's about it. I'm like, it's unbelievable how little parenting I got. And my dad, when I was probably, I don't know, it was somewhere between 11 and 13, probably 13. My dad left to go find work in Arizona, and I stayed in Oklahoma. And so I've not had a curfew or anything at all since that time. I can't remember any restraints. I wouldn't recommend that as parenting strategy, but I would say that the Lord is good. And I really want to say I've spent a lot of time working on the area of communications. I wrote a book called How to Communicate on Purpose. And really, I wrote this for men like you and for ministry leaders and for people because I began to recognize that most of my dilemmas in life could be traced back to a single conversation. That if I handled it differently, I wouldn't have had to live with those consequences. Or I would trace them back to a conversation that I just chose to avoid instead of having it. And those type of things can cost you. Yeah. The other thing I noticed is that all of my successes, everything that I've achieved that anybody would point to and say, wow, you did this or that, could be traced back to a conversation that seeded that. And I share that just to simply say that you may have not considered, but your life is a tapestry of the conversations you hold. And you're painting it, weaving it all the time. But you trace your conversations, you get a picture of your life. And so here's kind of the caveat I would share with you. If you will make a commitment to improve your conversations, then you will make a commitment to improve your life. Amen. You will. Improve your conversations just by a little bit. If you improved all of your conversations by a small percentage, your life would radically change. It really would. But where do you learn how to improve conversations? Where does that happen? It largely does not happen. You can go through 1st through 12th grade, and I met one person that had an interpersonal communication class in 8th grade today. He's the only one that I've met that went through high school or junior high or anything that had a communication course. And that's like unheard of. I certainly didn't have one. And so it's treated as though you're either good at it or you're not. And but I would say to you that your ability to have conversations are skills that you can develop, and that we can improve like I said, we can improve our life, we can improve our conversations, we can improve our marriages, we can improve our work environments, we can improve our gospel witness, we can improve our interactions with everybody around us. And that's kind of where I developed kind of my thought about this. And God really just put it on my heart to do. And I can tell you that I've spent since in-depth study since 2007. And I ran across, when I was working on my doctorate in the area of dialogue, I ran across a guy named David Baum, and he's the author of Modern Dialogue. And I was doing my D-Min at that time. And through his work, he compared dialogue and discussion, and he said, hey, they're different purposes, different characteristics, different practices. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. And then what that led me to be able to do was to walk into meetings. And meetings would often say, hey, I just want to have a dialogue with you. The leader would be there. But the problem is that there would be a leader, and then there would be a panel, and then there would be an agenda. And I knew immediately, we're not having any type of dialogue here. That's not what's happening here. What's happening here is You're about to say, do you guys have any questions? We want to hear from you. And here's our plan. Please sign off. That's what's about to happen. And I began to see through this because dialogue was a buzzword that everybody was using, but they had no idea what it meant. They had no idea. And I wouldn't have either. I mean, I was completely ignorant to the whole thing. And so once I learned the purpose of dialogue and the purpose of discussion, and there are different types of purpose or conversation skills, then I'm like, well, what in the world else do I not know? Because I didn't know any of this, and then I'm like, okay, and I'm just struggling through stuff. And then I ran across small talk. And so maybe the way to picture this, and I'll give you kind of a visual, is when you're thinking about a conversation and if this right here were a gauge here, and across this gauge, it said conversation and it was broken up into sections, then you might say, okay, storytelling is here, then small talk is here, dialogue, discussion, negotiation, and argument. And in any conversation, that needle can bat from here to here. It can just go like this all the time. But the challenge and the skill is learning how to hold the needle where it needs to be in that conversation so you can accomplish what needs to be accomplished. So, but when you start studying things like dialogue and discussion, you read books about them, here's what they all will tell you. You cannot become a good negotiator or person that is a discussion or anything like that. You can't do that unless you're a good listener. And so they would all treat listening as though it's a characteristic of negotiation or a characteristic of dialogue or whatever. But I knew that wasn't true. It's not true. Listening is not a characteristic of an expressive skill. Listening is its own skill. The difference is that it's not expressive. Listening is an internal skill. So while this needle is batting here like this right here all the time, there's an internal meter that's going all the time too. And then I'm like, okay, I knew listening was one, and that's the most popular one. And we're going to tackle that in our next session. But I then found out, okay, well, we've got listening. There's a skill called self-talk. There's conversational awareness. There's the idea of presence. And then there's reflection. And then the one that we're going to deal with tonight is how to increase conversational capacity, which deals with social anxiety. And to put this in perspective, in the hierarchy of fears, it goes from public speaking, or death, public speaking, right? Death, we're afraid of death, public speaking, and talking to a stranger. That's about how it works. So it rates really high. This idea of social anxiety affects everybody. It affects us all. And if you don't believe me, you haven't explored many conversations, because you haven't been in conversation with the person or the group that has put you in an uncomfortable situation yet, which I know that we're all looking pretty like we've got some years under our belt. So we've all been there, I'm pretty sure, about that. And so, and here's what I want to share with you about kind of an overview. If I were to boil all of the things that I've studied about this, and this book also took me 2.5 years to write, because there's so much to try to tackle and then give that away in one copy, because there's books that have been written about each one of these. And so trying to get that together. So, but if I were to kind of reduce this down to kind of two basic principles for you to hang on to, it would be these two. Conversations matter. That's number one. All of your conversations matter. All of your conversations matter. How many of the conversations that you read about Jesus having, how many of those didn't matter?
None.
Right. But we approach conversations, most of our conversations during any given day, as that this doesn't matter at all. And part of the problem with that is that when we approach a conversation, really we're approaching a person. And we're interacting with that person as though they don't matter. And that's the problem. Because and here's some indications. Not being present in the moment. If you approach a person and a conversation as though that conversation matters, you will be present in the moment. And that by its very nature will make the conversation matter. It'll make them feel valued. And so part of the problem is that we're just not very attentive, and we're not approaching these things as though they do matter. But I can tell you, all of the conversations matter. And I'll share a verse with you here that I'll just point out to you that I think is kind of a metaphor for this. But this happens in Luke chapter 24, verse 15, and it says, as they talked and discussed these things with each other. So they're having a conversation. Jesus himself came up and walked along with them.
Wow, that's good.
And here's what I want to share with you about conversations that you may have not considered. Jesus is a part of them all. He's a part of every one of them. That's why they matter. And sometimes, not only we don't even think that, we hardly ever think that Jesus is a part of this conversation. But I want to tell you this. If you knew he was present, you would be on target. You would be attentive.
Yeah.
You would be fully present in the moment. Well, I'm telling you, he is present. He's present during all of our conversations. And so that's why they matter. The second thing I would say is that conversations by their very nature are complex. There are no silver bullets. There are no, hey, here's 3 easy steps. If you do these 3 easy steps, then your conversation woes are over. That does not exist. I mean, just think about some of the basic natures of a conversation. You know, I'm thinking right now about stuff. You're thinking right now about stuff. And then we're trying to exchange words, meaning, body language, tone, all kinds of different things. And we're carrying stuff in that, oh man, I just got a phone call or just got an email, or oh my gosh, we got to hurry up because I got to go do this. We're carrying, and they are too. They're carrying all of this in. That's a very complex exchange. Now, we haven't even talked about the subject matter. The subject matter like eternal life. That's a pretty complex idea to begin to communicate, regardless of who tells you, oh, it's real simple. It's not real simple. That's a challenging conversation to have with somebody who has no context for that. You know, so they're complex. But if you just know that they're complex, you know what that will do for you? It will cause you to be patient. You will be present and you will be patient. Those 2 things will help all of your conversations be better. You know, just those 2 things alone. So I share that with you here, and I want to, I'm going to just share some notes with you as we get going. I want to show you in Exodus chapter 3 a conversation between Moses and the Lord. And this is during the encounter at the burning bush. And I just want to point out a few things, you know, here. When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. Who initiated this conversation? God did. And then God called him by name. And that's pretty important. And then Moses says, here am I, you know, like it's me, you know. And then God begins to tell him who he is. And then God begins to unfold his plan for Moses. And I want to point out some things that Moses, in his response, says. In verse 11, chapter 3, it says, but Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt. So God is telling him what he's going to do, and his response is, who am I? Where's Moses' focus? On himself, which is often the case when we find ourselves in a conversation. And this is true in his conversation with God. But it doesn't just stop there. And if you go to God speaks and tells him exactly what he's going to do, and then you get into verse 4 and it says, and Moses answered, what if they do not believe me? So, and he's like, or listen to me and say, the Lord did not appear to you. So he's starting to make excuses like, listen, what if they don't listen to me? Insecurity, fear, all those type of things start playing out. And then in verse 10 it says, Moses said to the Lord, oh Lord, I've never been eloquent. He starts making excuses. Neither in the past nor since you've spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and tongue. And then verse 13, but Moses said, oh Lord, please send someone else to do it. He doesn't even want to be a part of it. So he's made his excuses. He's brought up all kinds of reasons why, God got the wrong person. And then he comes out and really just tells the truth here. Lord, please send somebody else to do this. Because he doesn't really want to do it. And then there's a great verse in there. And it's in verse 15. He says, and God says, I will help both of you, meaning Aaron, speak and will teach you what to do. And so here's one of the things that I see in this particular verse is that Moses' inability, his perceived and maybe real inability to communicate, God said, I'm going to teach you how to do this. I'm going to work it out. I just need you to go. We'll work it out along the way here. And I think that's pretty kind of the Lord for sure. There's a passage in Colossians chapter 4, verse 6, and it says, let your conversations be always full of grace. Now let that sink in. Let your conversations be always full of grace. Always full of grace. Seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer each person. Now what that particular verse is telling you is that all of your conversations are going to be unique. And you're going to have to carry in those conversations the grace of the Lord. And the idea of seasoned with salt means don't be boring. Be an interesting person. That's what that is really kind of talking about. And then be thoughtful so that you can gear that to that particular person. So this is skill, is what this is dealing with here. May your conversations always, that's a big word. That's a big word. Always full of grace, seasoned with salt, so you might know how to answer each person. And this reminds us that not every gospel conversation is going to be different. Every conversation is going to be different as well. And so I want to share an encounter I had. I was in Australia. This was a number of years ago. But I got to preach at a church there, and they had 2 services. So I was preaching at the first service, then there was a break, and then I preached at the second one. And so I got done with the first service, and I was just kind of milling around, waiting, kind of meeting people, trying to get my mind right, to get ready for the next one, all those type of things. And the worship leader came up to me and said, hey, I really enjoyed your message. I wish you would have prayed longer. And I'm like, what? I'm thinking to myself, what? What do you mean? I wish you'd have prayed longer. I'm like, I didn't know there was some quota. Like, how long am I supposed to pray? I prayed as much as I thought I needed to pray and all that. And I'm like, isn't there a passage that says, don't keep on babbling like the pagans and stuff? My mind went everywhere. But what I said was, hey, I'm glad you enjoyed the message. Hope it was an encouragement to you. And I'm thinking to myself, why in the world would a stranger that I just met tell me, I wish you would have prayed longer. And I'm thinking just kind of like, that makes no sense. And then the light bulb came on. She wanted me to pray longer so the worship team could get into position. That's what it was. You know what the problem was? She didn't come close to saying anything like that. Wasn't even close. How many times do our conversations end up with something like that?
All the time.
All the time. You know, well, I said this. Well, I have no idea what you meant. Like, not even close. Not even in the ballpark. You know, I mean, it took some mental gymnastics to get there. But then once I understood what she wanted and what she needed from me, I was more than happy to do it. I'm like, you know what? I get that. You know, she wanted a smooth transition. She didn't want this awkward, pause and stuff so that, the people were disconnected and they're, thinking about everybody getting on stage, not worried about stuff. She wanted it to be smooth so that those people could stay connected to God. And you know what? I was more than happy to do it. And then I stopped being mad at her, just like that. It was just like it's all over. I'm like, I get it. I understand it. It's good. But that is kind of an example of how a lot of our conversations go. It's kind of like, whew, we're just missing each other along the way. We need to learn how to increase our capacity for conversations. And how do we do that? And again, this kind of deals with this idea of social anxiety, which we all have. And this is where this kind of chapter, the first chapter, begins. How many of you have heard the saying, you need to get out of your comfort zone? How many of you said, man, you need to get out of your comfort zone? Y'all all said it as preachers, right? I'm going to give you another way to frame this. You do not need to get out of your comfort zone. You need to learn how to expand it. Think about all the things that you do today without a second thought, that the first time that you did them, you're like, there's no way I'm going to be able to do this. My first driving experience, I was 10 years old. You know it couldn't be a good story if you start like that, right? You're like, it couldn't happen good. I was sitting in my dad's car. My neighbor friend was sitting in the passenger seat. My dad always left the keys in the car. Bad mistake. 10 years old. My friend said, I bet you can't drive this car. I'm like, I'm no chicken. I'm taking that dare. And I promptly backed my dad's car into our neighbor's fence. That was my first driving experience. My maiden voyage was not very successful, for sure. But now I can get in a car and I can drive wherever I need to go. We don't start anything where we want to be. We start where we are and then we progress from there. Amen. And that's how we do it all. And so the same thing with conversations. We start with conversations where we are, not where we want to be. And then we expand our comfort zone, what we're comfortable dealing with. And when you think about the nature of getting out of your comfort zone, it's kind of like a mouse running to get cheese. I'm going to go for it. I'm going to get this. I'm going to do it. And then you run out there and get that cheese and you do it. And then you run back to your hole and like, woo, I got that cheese. It's great. Remember? And then you spend the next 10 years talking about that one piece of cheese that you got. That's what it's like, witnessing one time. I did it. You've got to expand what you're comfortable doing and the conversations you're comfortable having if you're going to be effective in the kingdom of God. Good. You're going to have to do it. And you know what? Pastors are not exempt. We're not exempt from those conversations in any way. And sometimes all we do is spend time around Christian people. And then there is no expansion happening. It takes zero effort on your part to have those conversations because you have them all day long. And then your ability to have conversations with non-believers is almost non-existent. And so it's easy for us to stay there. It's safe. It's comfortable. And there is no getting better. if you stay in the mouse hole. So you can't view it as, I've got to get out of my comfort zone. You got to view it as, I'm going to expand what I'm comfortable doing. And I'm going to get better at it. So increase your capacity. And I think in dealing with this is we got to answer, or at least ask the question, what causes social anxiety? What keeps us from actually having the conversations that we need to have? I mean, what's core?
Fear.
Yeah. So yeah, it's a 4-letter word that starts with F. It's not a curse word. Probably should be, right? But it's not. It's fear.
Yeah.
But is fear real?
It's lack of faith.
Think about it. Is fear real? Is it real? Most of the things that you fear never come to pass. They were never real. Now there's another concept, danger. Danger's real. But fear almost always is something we make up in our mind. Almost always. Most of the things that you fear have never come to pass. You know, and when you start going out, knocking on doors, or you're having a conversation with somebody, you're scared to death and all that kind of stuff that happens when you first start doing it. And then sometimes you feel like you're really in an awkward situation. Maybe the person that you feel like you need to share with is, you know, got some, super title or this or that. And that can create fear because you feel like, you're inferior some way. All of those type of things. But that fear is not real. Your life is not in danger. I mean, most of the time, your life here in the United States, I would say, is not in danger. Now, there's other people in other parts. I just got back from Indonesia, and I was working with a group of people from Afghanistan. They had danger. They were facing it. One of the brothers there was sharing the gospel with a group of Muslims, and they beat him something awful. That's danger. You don't face that. You don't face it. In the grand scheme of things. That's not even close to what the reality that we face. And I can tell you right now, in the world in which we live, they're going to want you to believe that you need to be afraid to have conversations. But I can tell you that's not from God. Have the conversations you need to have with that. And deal with the fear for what it really is, not for its perceived thing, not for what you think it would be. So let's think about the first conversation in the garden. Have you thought about the first conversation recorded in the Bible, the whole kind of episode, between, we'll start with the conversation between God and Adam and Eve. So the deed is done. And I'll point out two things about this. One of the things I've thought about for a long time, but I had a new thought here recently. And that is, Adam was there the whole time and he said nothing. He needed to have a conversation that he didn't have with Eve. He should have had a conversation with Eve.
That's right.
And it's his silence that is a big reason.
That's right.
But you know what? There's another conversation that didn't happen. Eve didn't submit to Adam. She never went to Adam and said, Adam, what should we do? She didn't do it. She didn't have the conversation she needed to have either. And then God is coming. Now fear. There was no fear. Until this moment of disobedience against what they knew God didn't want them to do, now fear entered their heart, and it was a new feeling. It was something they had never experienced before. Every day prior to that day, they enjoyed walking in the cool of the day with God. They enjoyed every other tree. They enjoyed the fellowship. There was an unhindered relationship with the Creator that they loved. But this day, it was completely severed. The disobedience, the sin cut, created fear, and it caused them to act in ways that they had never acted before. They hid. They ran. And so when God gets there and he says, who did he talk to? He didn't talk to Eve. He talked to Adam. And you know what the question was? Adam, what have you done? What have you done? Isn't that interesting? And then you see this conversational meltdown. I mean, and it happens quick. It's the woman you gave me. Blame. Deflection. You know, the counter argument. You did it. You know, she did it. And you gave her to me. And then what does she do? You know, that serpent. He tricked me. Yeah, more fear, more deflection. And you know what you see in this first conversation in the Bible? A complete train wreck. That's what you see. That's the first one. It's the first real conversation that they're having with God. And it does not end well. Like the train runs off the track and it's bad, you know, for sure. And that conversation really describes a lot of our conversations today. Where we're not even, and there's some fundamental things here that are not happening that should happen, that are key for us to move forward. And one of the things that is kind of glaring here in its absence is this. Both of them fail to take responsibility for their part. And so, if you're going to deal with expanding your conversational capacity, you're going to have to take responsibility for your words, your thoughts, your ideas, and your actions. They're yours. You said it, you thought it, you did it. It's your responsibility. And so that's the truth of what they're avoiding here. And so you're not going to solve the problem of expanding your conversational capacity without taking personal responsibility. And so I want to I'll share, like, here's how I taught my children about this. I would say to them, let's just say my son, when he was little, he didn't take out the trash. We'll use that as an example. And maybe I said, hey, Asher, I'm going to go to work, but I want you to make sure that you take out the trash before I get home. I get home and the trash hadn't been taken out. Then I'm calling him into the kitchen. I'm saying, hey, Asher, why didn't you take out the trash like I told you? And then he's going to come up with a bunch of excuses about why he didn't take out the trash. No, Dad, I forgot. Dad, I got busy. Dad, I did this. I'm like, listen, buddy, you're here all day. And then what happens when the more excuses he makes and the more blame he casts, the more deflection he does, pretty soon it's like, the more intense the conversation gets. You know, and pretty soon you're in like an interrogation room with a bright spotlight, and you're sitting in the chair, he's sitting in the chair, and you're like, because you're narrowing him down, because you know he knew what he was supposed to do. And so what is that problem all caused by? Lack of responsibility. And so here's what you need to understand about responsibility. Responsibility is tethered to respect. You will not respect someone who is not responsible. If you want to be respected, then take responsibility. Amen. That's how it works. And so here's what I taught my kids. if you didn't do something I asked you to do, and I ask you about it, this is how you respond. Dad, that's my responsibility. I'll make it right. And then I'll say to them, I respect that. Thank you. And that's how it goes. That's the end of it. And I gave the metaphor to my kids like this. I'm like, you know, if I ask you to do something, you don't do it, and I start like interrogating you for that, that's like handing me a stick and saying, please hit me with it. And the more, you know, and the more that you deny that, I'm just going to whack you harder and faster, you know, and you're going to be like, bah, 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 bah. You know, I'm like, if you want that to stop, then just take responsibility. And then I'll give you back your stick and we'll be done with it.
Amen.
You know, that's how that works. I wanted them to have a visual of what that feels like, you know, when it's happening, you know. But we've got to take responsibility for our own words, thoughts, and ideas. And I'm going to give you a way to do this. Replace we statements with I statements. See, we are not technically honest in much of our conversations. And I'll give you like a pastoral example that I'll guarantee you that you have experienced in your church. Somebody comes to you and says, you know, Pastor, there's a lot of people in the church that, you know, are saying this or that. Right? You've been there, right? There's a lot. Man, they're like, how many is a lot? You know, we're talking, how many is that? And once I began to understand how communication works, this is how I would deal with that. I would just simply say, you know, that I don't know if that's true, but you're here and I respect you, so just tell me what's on your mind. You know, and if anybody else that you've talked to wants to talk to me, send them my way. You know.
That's good.
But you're the one I want to hear from. Obviously, you got something on your mind, so tell me what's on your mind. Speak for yourself. Do you know why people bring in the we and the our and the many? Is they want to up the leverage to get you. But here's the problem. It's not true. And if it's not true, who is at work?
Yeah.
Woo!
The liar.
The liar is at work. That's who's at work. And you need to be able to quicken yourself to those moments and recognize this is not a personal attack. This is a spiritual attack. Amen. And you've got to then reorient yourself to get your eyes on Jesus. Amen. And you might need to do some praying and fasting for some of these things to get out. Amen. But we got to understand these things. We can't be duped. The scripture says don't be unaware of his schemes. And you are unaware every time you're not taking responsibility for something you own. It's your responsibility. And that's the first step, I would say, that we can take to increase our capacity for conversations. The second one is called apply positive intent. Apply positive intent. And so let me give you something to think about here. If you were to do a survey of it, let's just say one day, and probably today would be kind of abnormal. So think about like a regular day where you would just be going about your business, going to the church, going to the store, or going to this or that. How many of those conversations do you initiate because you want something? If you were to give a percentage, how high would you rate that? Every text you send, every call you make, every door you knock on, how many of those percentage-wise you would do because you want something? Would you agree that it's a fairly high percentage? I would say on most days, it's almost all of them. You know, you want your kid to do something, you want your person to do something, you want the store to give you something, you want something, you know. And here's the problem. We're approaching most of our conversations to get something rather than to give something. And so when you approach conversations and you want to expand that, you've got to learn how to rewire what you're doing. and rewire them in such a way that you're wanting to give to the person, not take something from them, to apply positive intent. And so and we just need to understand and create an awareness that most of our conversations that we're starting are not to give something. So, but it will make it a lot easier to have a conversation with somebody if you're actually initiating that conversation to give something. Like, it's a lot easier. There's no pressure, because if you're wanting to get something, then the fear of rejection is always there. The fear of not getting what you want is always there. And so that complicates that. But if that's not even present, it's much easier to start a conversation. So start a conversation with positive intent. There was a Coca-Cola campaign a number of years ago. They just brought it back here recently. And it's called Give a Coke. And you're all familiar with it, right? It's the ones with the names on the cans. And so the idea of that is, hey, buy a Coke for you, find a friend's name, buy that Coke for them, and to give that Coke. You know what they tapped into? Positive intent. It was the best marketing campaign they've ever done. They wanted to, and they tapped into that idea of giving something away. You guys know who Tim Tebow is? Are y'all familiar with the John 3:16 story? You know, he wore eye blacks, and the eye blacks all through the year said, Philippians 4:13, I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. Okay, I want you to think about that. I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. And then right before the national championship game, and Urban Meyer, his coach, is very superstitious. He changes it to John 3:16. And the coach noticed and said, why are you doing that? Like, don't change stuff. You mess up the vibe, you know. And he said, I just feel like this is what God wants me to do. So he put John 3:16 before the national championship game. Do you know how many people Googled John 3:16 after or during that game? 94 million people. 94 million people. What's the difference between I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength and for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son?
That's good.
One is to give and one is to get. And we have that nature about us, a tremendous selfish nature, where we have this crazy ability to make anything about ourselves. Like, it doesn't really kind of matter where it starts. We can somehow turn that and make that about us. So, but if you're wanting to expand your ability to have conversations, then we need to learn how to approach conversations with positive intent. You know, looking to give something. You can give a compliment. I've got my 23-year-old daughter now, Chloe. She did this when she was little, and she's been great at it ever since. Like, she'd walk into a store, man, I love those shoes. Where'd you get those shoes? You know, tell me about those shoes. You know, all that kind of stuff. And she's doing that not because she wants those shoes. She's doing that to give to that person. And then how does that person respond to her? Man, this kid's great. That's what they're doing. Can I get this kid something? All that kind of stuff. That wasn't her intent. I watched my wife ask a barista this. Tell me about your favorite drink. Tell me why you like it. Man, she just lit up like a Christmas tree. Oh, this is what I like. I do it this. Oh, let me make it for you. You know, but that wasn't the intent. It wasn't to get anything. But when you give,
That's right.
it's often received and reciprocated. You know, and we can change how we approach people. We've got the greatest gift ever. And we have the gospel.
That's right.
And it is a gift. And we have something, and I would say this, as a Christian, we always have something worth giving to somebody else.
Yeah.
You know, for sure. So approach with positive intent. The next one I want to talk about is what's called the indifference to outcome. The indifference to outcome.
What was the first word?
The first one was take responsibility.
No.
The next one was apply positive intent.
Then this one.
And then this one is indifference to outcome.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, you're okay. So think about, the concern about the outcome will impact why we engage. So we're often so concerned about the outcome, and often it's driven by the complication is driven by the fear of what other people might think about us. So do you actually know what other people are thinking about you? Would that be fair to say that we don't? And would it probably be fair to say that they're probably not thinking about you?
Yeah.
They're probably thinking about themselves, because most of the time, who are we thinking about?
Ourselves.
We're thinking about ourselves. So I would say if it's true for you, it's probably true for everybody else, right? But we're all thinking, everybody else is thinking about us while we're thinking about ourselves. That's not how that works. And so now we've manufactured a fear that doesn't exist. I wonder what they're thinking about me. I know they're thinking about me. They're thinking, we're just putting words in their mouth. We're doing all kinds of stuff by that point, And then what does that actually keep us from doing? Engaging at all. In Bible thing, I would point out this. That is self-deception. Nobody else is deceiving you except yourself. You are deceiving yourself because you're the one that's feeding that kind of stuff to you. And you at that point are self-deceived because none of that's happening. So then you have to get your mind in a state of neutral where you're not concerned about the outcome. And you know what happens when you stop being concerned about the outcome? You start focusing on the person. That's the beautiful part.
That's good.
When you stop thinking about the outcome, what are you going to get out of it? You are then freed up to think about the person that's right in front of you, to enjoy them, to take them in. And that, by its very nature, will take care of the outcome. And so when we get in that place, that's kind of that principle of indifference to outcome. Yeah. Just a little kind of caveat. I don't know how many of you guys are into movies or whatnot, but what's interesting, there's a correlation between movies like Gone with the Wind, Harry Potter, The Wizard of Oz, Twilight, all those type of things. Do you know what those movies have in common? Rejection. All of them were rejected many times. If the author of those works would have been overly concerned about the outcome, would they have ever shared them again? I think one of those they had to submit 26 times before someone, I think it was Harry Potter, before somebody picked it up. If J.K. Rowling, if I remember properly, if it was her, what would have happened if she would have not done it after all of that? So if you're only concerned with the outcome, you'll quit early. You'll quit before God has His work in you. And so we need to get to a place where we're not quitting, we're learning and we're growing. And so don't let rejection keep you from discovering what God has for you. So that's the indifference to outcome. Let me see if I got my pages right. Yeah. All right. The fourth one is measured exposure. And I'll share this. Think about it like, we talked a little bit about this earlier, so I'm not going to spend much time on this, but the idea of measured exposure, to get good at anything, you have to be exposed to it. So if you're going to get good at witnessing, you're not going to get good at witnessing by not witnessing. You're actually going to have to go out and witness. If you're not good at speaking, You're going to have to speak in order to get better at that. And then there's lots of things that you can do to improve that, but you're going to have some exposure to it. So if you watch somebody who's really good at debating, you know, William Lane Craig or somebody like that, you know, that's really, really highly skilled. You're like, wow, how did that happen? Well, he's been doing it for a while. You know, like he's been doing it so long, there are no new arguments. And he is so dialed in the arguments that he has, they don't even have a chance because they've not even come close to thinking through it or talking through it the way he has. Not even close. So the only thing really standing between us and getting better is exposure. And so when it comes to exposure, kind of here's the key. Don't get so much exposure that it kills you. You know, don't do that. And don't get so little exposure that you don't grow. You've got to have enough exposure where it's a little bit dangerous, but not fatal. You've got to get out there and do it. And you've got to just have some courage. And by the way, that's what God says. Have I not, when he was speaking to Joshua after Moses, have I not commanded you to have courage? Right? Get out there and get with it. And so measured exposure is really important to understand. And then the last thing I want to share with you tonight has to do probably with one of the hardest things to do. And that has to do with tension and the ability to stand in tension. And so as ministry leaders and as husbands and as, you know, people that work in this world, tension is something that we don't want to get comfortable in. We want to run from. Because tension by its nature will create fight or flight. And so we have to learn how to think through this idea of tension differently. And so I'll give you an example. I used to drive to Colorado during the summers, and I would stop by a place called Wolf Creek Pass. Have any of y'all ever been through Wolf Creek Pass? I don't know if it still is like this today, but back in the day, there were no fences. And so you could actually walk out onto the cliff part, and I would sit on the cliff and I would dangle my legs over the cliff. And if you fell, it's over. Like there's no recovery. And there's just something about doing it. Like I would slide off, you know. I wouldn't just like sit down. I would slide to the edge, hang over, get my stuff, and then my heart would be like, bah, 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 bah. You could feel the blood vessels in your neck. Boom, 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 boom. You know, it started affecting you physically. Like you were in tension. But by being there in that tension and learning how to sit there, then you saw this incredible vista. And it was beautiful. I mean, it was spectacular. And it's kind of like a strange paradox. You can't experience the beauty without dealing with the tension. Early on in my marriage, Janice and I were having a spirited conversation. And towards the end of this spirited conversation, she said this to me. She said, "This is my problem. I'll deal with it." And when she said that, I stepped to her and I just put my arms around her and I said, "No, this is our problem. We'll deal with it together." She just melted. And our relationship went to a level it had never been before. You don't get to the beauty apart from the tension. Amen. And you've got to be willing to stand in the tension. Because relationships are at stake. You know who modeled that? Jesus. Stood in the tension of crucifixion. Enduring that for who? For us. I think you and I should be able to deal with a little bit of tension so that we can help other people get to know Him. So we can help our wives and our kids know that we love them. And that tension is not going to break us. It's going to expose our love for them. And so we need to learn how to stand in that tension. And I'll share with you like one practical way to do this. And this may Sounds strange, but you've got to learn how to control your breathing. Have you ever been in a board meeting and you knew you should say something and it's like your throat, like the words, you'd have to like try to get them out, and like all your physical things are happening. The way that you've got to do something that counteracts that, learn how to breathe. And you breathe deep into your stomach, because what happens to you physically is that your breath shallows and your pulse quickens. And then all that blood is starting to rush around, and you need to slow that down. And you do that by controlling your breathing. And then that gives your mind a little bit of pause so you can just recapture where you are. That's how you can work that. And that's a practical way to deal with tension. So these 5 areas here help us navigate the challenges of expanding our ability to have the conversations we really need to have, so we're not avoiding them, and so that we're able to be useful by the Lord and in the relationships that we have.
That's good.
Thank you guys so much. Let's have a word of prayer.